Call came at 2047 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'd been awake anyway, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of decaf. I wasn't really drinking, thinking about nothing in particular the way old men do when sleep stops coming easy. The phone lit up on the counter and I saw my son-in-law's name and felt something go cold in my chest before I even answered. "It's Nora," he said. His voice was flat. Too flat. She collapsed. They took her by ambulance. "You should come to Mercy General." He hung up before I could ask a single question. I drove the 20 minutes to the hospital in a kind of controlled panic, the kind where your hands work the steering wheel just fine, but your mind is somewhere far away, running through every terrible possibility. My daughter was 34 years old. She'd been complaining of fatigue for months, headaches, stomach trouble. She kept blaming on stress. I'd told her to see a doctor. She'd said she would. I don't know if she ever did. When I walked through the emergency entrance, I found my son-in-law, Garrett, sitting in a chair near the nurse's station with his elbows on his knees and his phone in his hands. He looked up when he saw me, nodded once, said the doctors were with her and we just had to wait. He didn't hug me. He didn't stand up. He went back to his phone. I sat down across from him and waited. About 40 minutes later, a doctor in scrubs came out and asked if I was the family. I said yes. My son-in-law stayed seated, which struck me as odd, but I didn't think about it much in the moment. The doctor, a compact, serious man named Dr. Okafor, asked if I'd step down the hall for a moment. I followed him around a corner, past a supply cart, to a small alcove near a window that looked out on the parking structure. He turned to face me and lowered his voice, and what he said stopped the world. "Mr. Callahan," he said, "I need you to listen carefully, and I need you to not react in any visible way when you go back out there. Are you able to do that?" I said I thought so. "Your daughter is stable. She's going to make it through the night." He paused. "But what's causing her symptoms isn't stress, and it isn't a virus. We found elevated thallium levels in her blood work. Thallium is a heavy metal. It doesn't appear there by accident." I heard the words. I understood them. I just couldn't make them fit into any version of reality I was standing in. "Someone has been poisoning her," he said quietly. "Slowly. Over a period of months, based on the tissue damage we're seeing. We're going to treat her, and she will recover. But Mr. Callahan, I need to ask you about her home environment. Who has consistent access to her food and drink?" I didn't answer right away. My mouth wouldn't work. The doctor put a hand briefly on my shoulder. "You're going to walk back out there and sit down. And you're not going to say a word about this to anyone in that waiting room. Do you understand me? I've already contacted someone, but these things take time. For your daughter's safety and your grandchildren's safety. She cannot know you know. Not yet. My grandchildren. My granddaughter Ivy, who was 7 and obsessed with horses. My grandson Miles, who was 5 and still called me Pop Pop, with complete sincerity. They were home right now, presumably asleep, with a babysitter my son-in-law had called. I walked back out to the waiting room and sat down across from Garrett and looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since I'd arrived. He had a good face. That had always been the thing about Garrett. An open, easy face. The kind that made you feel like you were talking to someone with nothing to hide. He'd coached Miles's soccer team last fall. He made a show of calling me every Father's Day. Nora had met him at a work conference in Phoenix 6 years ago, and inside of 3 months she was telling me she was going to marry him. I hadn't loved the speed of it. My wife, Nora's mother, passed when Nora was in college, and I'd been the only parent she had for 15 years. I took that seriously. I had some questions about Garrett when they first got together. Nothing I could point to exactly. Just a feeling that he was performing something. But Nora was 30 years old and happy, and I told myself I was just a stubborn old man who didn't want to give up his daughter. I let it go. Sitting in that waiting room at 3 in the morning, watching him scroll through his phone without a trace of fear on his face, I understood that I had been a fool. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. Nora was moved to a room on the third floor. The doctors told her she'd had a severe metabolic reaction, that they were still running tests, that she needed rest. They kept her on monitors. She believed them, or at least she didn't push back, because Nora had always trusted doctors the way I'd taught her to. You listen to the experts. You follow the protocol. You don't make a fuss. Garrett visited twice a day, morning and evening, with flowers the first time and a smoothie the second. He kissed her forehead. He told her the kids were fine. He sat by her bed and held her hand. And I sat in the corner chair and watched him do all of it, and felt something change permanently inside me, like a bone resetting in the wrong position. On a second day, I called my buddy Warren. We've been friends since 1987, both of us mechanics at the same shop in Dayton before I moved the family to Columbus. Warren had done some PI work after he retired, nothing fancy, mostly insurance fraud and the occasional missing person. I called him from the hospital parking garage, and I kept my voice low, and I told him everything the doctor had told me. Warren didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "Frank, you sure about this?" I told him I was sure. He said he'd make some calls. What Warren found over the next 48 hours, I have replayed in my mind so many times since then, that it stopped feeling like information and started feeling like something carved into me. Garrett's full legal name was Garrett Allen Morrow. He'd been married twice before Nora. His first wife, a woman named Patricia. No, I'll say it the way it was in the records Warren pulled. A woman who died of what was listed as cardiac arrhythmia in Boise, Idaho, 4 years before he met my daughter. She was 31. She had a $2 million life insurance policy that named Garrett as beneficiary. The payout cleared 11 weeks after her death. His second wife died 14 months later. Liver failure, the death certificate said. She was 29. Another policy. Another payout. He'd moved from Boise to Denver to Phoenix, each time with enough distance between the past and the present that no one was connecting the dots. Until now. I sat in my truck in the hospital parking garage and stared at the photos Warren had texted me, and I thought about my daughter lying 3 floors above me with metal in her blood, and I thought about my grandchildren at home, and I thought about how I had shaken this man's hand at my daughter's wedding and told him to take care of her. I thought about his face. I went back inside. The hardest performance of my life began that afternoon, and it lasted 11 days. I had to be the concerned father-in-law. I had to sit next to Garrett at the nurse's station while he charmed the staff. I had to nod when he talked about getting Nora home soon, about how the kids missed her, about how they were thinking about taking a family trip to the Outer Banks once she was feeling better. He mentioned the trip twice. I understand now that he was already thinking past her recovery, or what he intended her recovery to look like. On the 4th day, I found out about the policy. Warren called me while I was in the hospital chapel. I'd been going there every morning just to sit, not really to pray. And he told me that 18 months ago, Garrett had taken out a life insurance policy on Nora. $2.5 million. My daughter's signature was on it, which meant either she'd signed willingly without understanding the size of it, or she hadn't signed at all. The policy had a double indemnity clause. It would pay out $5 million if her death was classified as accidental. I pressed my phone against my ear so hard it left a mark on my jaw. Warren said the detective he'd been in contact with, a woman at the Columbus PD named Reyes, was ready to move, but they needed a few more days to get everything in order. Idaho and Colorado were cooperating. The Boise case was being re-examined. They were close. "Can you hold on a few more days?" Warren asked me. I told him I could hold on as long as I needed to. That night I sat with Nora alone for the first time. Garrett had taken the kids to his sister's place, a woman I'd met exactly twice, pleasant enough, who I now looked at differently. and visiting hours were technically over, but the night nurse had known me by name since day 2, and she looked the other way. Nora was tired, but more alert than she'd been. The treatment was working. She had color back in her face. She asked me if I'd been eating, which is such a Nora thing to do, lying in a hospital bed and worrying about her father. I told her I was eating fine. She looked at me for a moment in that way she'd always been able to. The same look her mother used to give me, like she was reading something in the air around me. "You seem off, Dad." I told her I was just scared, which was true, just not in the way she thought. She reached over and patted my hand. "I'm going to be okay." I nodded. I didn't trust myself to speak. What I wanted to tell her was, I know. I know what's been making you sick. I know why you've been tired for months. I know about the headaches and the stomach pain, and I know it wasn't stress, and I know whose fault it is. I know about Boise. I know about the policy. I know about the 2 women who weren't as lucky as you. I didn't say any of it. I squeezed her hand and told her I loved her, and I went home and sat at my kitchen table until 4 in the morning, going over everything Warren had sent me, making sure I understood every detail, making sure I hadn't missed anything. I had spent 40 years as a mechanic. If there is one thing that work teaches you, it's that you do not rush the job. You take the time to understand what you're looking at. You don't start pulling parts until you know exactly what's wrong. You do it right, or you do it twice. I was going to do this right. On day 9, Garrett stopped by my house. This was unusual. He didn't make a habit of visiting me alone. Our relationship had always been cordial, pleasant-surfaced, conducted mostly through Nora as a kind of social intermediary. But he showed up on a Tuesday evening with a 6-pack of beer I hadn't asked for, and he sat down at my kitchen table with the ease of a man who believed he had nothing to be afraid of. We talked about Miles's upcoming birthday. We talked about the Columbus Blue Jackets, who were having another disappointing season. He asked how I'd been sleeping. I said not great, which was the truth. Then he said, leaning back in his chair with his bottle of beer resting on his knee, "I've been looking into some things, Frank, for Nora's care. Some specialists. I found a long-term treatment facility in Scottsdale that's supposed to be exceptional." I looked at him. "It's expensive," he said, "but I want her to have the best. I was going to talk to you about maybe helping to cover some of the costs since the insurance situation it's complicated." I took a slow sip of my beer. A treatment facility in Scottsdale, far from Columbus, far from the doctors who were already treating her, far from me. "I'll think about it," I said. He nodded, satisfied, and we talked about the Blue Jackets for another 20 minutes, and then he left, and I sat there in my kitchen for a long time after his taillights disappeared down the street. I called Warren before his car had even turned the corner. 2 days later, Detective Reyes called me directly. She had a careful voice, precise, the kind of voice that had delivered difficult news enough times to have developed a specific register for it. She told me the investigation was ready to move. She told me they had enough. She asked me if I could be available the following morning. I told her I'd be wherever she needed me. The arrest happened at the hospital. Garrett was there for his morning visit. I was already in Nora's room when I heard the commotion in the hallway, and then Detective Reyes walked in with 2 uniformed officers, and she looked at me once. A brief, acknowledging look, and then she turned to Garrett and said his full name, and told him to stand up. He didn't move for a moment. I watched his face. I watched the calculation happen behind his eyes, the split second where he was deciding how to play it. Then something shifted. The easy, open expression didn't disappear exactly. It just became a different kind of performance. He stood slowly, put his hands up in a gesture of cooperative confusion and said, "What is this about?" "Sir, please turn around. I don't understand what's happening." "Mr. Morrow, turn around." Nora was watching from the bed. I couldn't look at her. Not yet. They walked him out. One of the officers stayed to speak with her. Detective Reyes came back and sat down on the edge of a chair near the window. and she told my daughter, in that careful voice of hers, what Garrett Allen Morrow had done to her, what he had done to her body over the course of 8 months, what he had done to 2 women before her. Nora didn't cry right away. She sat very still, looking at a spot on the wall somewhere above the window, and she was quiet for such a long time that I started to worry. Then she turned to me and she said, very quietly, "You knew." It wasn't an accusation, I don't think. It was more like she was putting something together. I told her I'd known for about 10 days. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Thank you, Dad," and she started to cry. And I moved my chair next to her bed, and I held her hand, and I let her. The legal process that followed was not quick. These things never are. The Boise case was reopened, the Denver case reclassified. There were extradition hearings, evidence reviews, jurisdictional conversations between 3 different states. Garrett's attorney, a sharp man from a downtown firm who I'm certain charged more per hour than I made in a week at the peak of my career, argued strenuously that the evidence was circumstantial, that the policies were legitimate financial planning, that Garrett had been an attentive and loving husband who was now being railroaded. The jury in Columbus didn't buy it. Neither did the jury in Idaho. Garrett Allen Morrow was convicted of attempted murder in Ohio. The federal case involving 2 counts of murder in the first degree, built on the reopened investigations from Boise and Denver, took another 14 months to resolve. He is currently serving 3 consecutive life sentences at a federal correctional institution in Indiana. He will never be eligible for parole. The insurance policies were voided. The previous payouts are the subject of ongoing civil proceedings. I don't know how that will resolve, and I've stopped following it closely because it stopped mattering to me. What matters to me is this. It's a Saturday morning in October, and I'm standing at the stove making pancakes. Ivy is at the kitchen table drawing horses, which she has been drawing almost exclusively for 2 years now, filling entire notebooks with them. Miles is on the floor nearby building something ambitious out of Legos, narrating the construction process to himself in a low-focused voice. The radio is on. It's cool outside and the back door is open and there's the smell of fall coming in through the screen. Nora is sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee. She moved back to Columbus 8 months ago, after the divorce was finalized and after she completed the last round of chelation therapy, and after she had found a good therapist and established herself in something like a routine. She lives 12 minutes from me. She comes over most Saturdays. She is doing well. Not effortlessly, not without cost. She still has some days where the anger comes back or the grief over what was done to her becomes too heavy to carry lightly. She has had to rebuild her understanding of 6 years of her life. That's not a small thing, but she is doing it the way she has always done hard things, which is steadily and without complaint, and with more grace than she gives herself credit for. I plate the pancakes and carry them out to the porch and set one down in front of her. She looks up from her coffee and smiles at me. She has her mother's eyes. She always has. I pull up the other chair and we sit there for a while without talking, watching the leaves move in the oak tree at the edge of the yard. Miles comes to the screen door and announces that he needs syrup. I tell him to come get it himself. He makes a sound of theatrical suffering and disappears back inside. Nora laughs. A real laugh, quiet and unguarded, the kind I hadn't heard from her in longer than I want to think about. I look out at the yard and I think about that night in the hospital chapel, sitting in the last pew with my phone in my lap and Warren's voice in my ear, and I think about all the mornings after that when I sat across from Garrett and kept my face still and gave him nothing. I think about how close it came. I think about the 2 women in Boise and Denver who didn't have anyone sitting across the kitchen table in the middle of the night running the numbers, and I carry that with me. The weight of the luck of it, the terrible randomness of who gets the warning and who doesn't. I'm not a man who uses words like justice easily. I've lived long enough to know that the word gets used to mean a lot of different things by a lot of different people, and most of the time the reality falls short of whatever comfort you hoped the word would carry. But my daughter is on my porch drinking coffee. My grandchildren are inside making a mess of my kitchen. The man who tried to take them from me is in a federal prison in Indiana. For now, on this particular morning, in this particular chair, that is enough. I keep coming back to the moment in that hospital hallway when Dr. Okafor told me not to react, not to let my face show a single thing. I was 63 years old, standing under fluorescent lights in a building that smelled like antiseptic and floor wax, and a man I'd never met before was asking me to hold the most devastating information of my life completely still, inside my body, and walk back out into a room where the person responsible for it was sitting 10 feet away. I've thought about that ask a lot, what it required of me, and what it would have cost Nora if I hadn't been able to do it. The truth is, I almost didn't. There was a moment, one specific moment, on day 4, when Garrett sat across from me in Nora's room talking about the Outer Banks trip he was planning, where I felt something rise up in me that I genuinely wasn't sure I could contain. Not anger exactly, something older and more physical than anger. I pressed my feet flat against the floor, and I breathed, and I thought about Ivy drawing horses at my kitchen table, and I held it. That's the thing nobody tells you about protecting the people you love. It isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like sitting still. Sometimes it looks like nodding and saying, "That sounds nice," when every part of you wants to do something else entirely. I've also thought a lot about what I didn't do sooner. Nora had been tired for months. She'd mentioned the headaches, the stomach trouble. I told her to see a doctor the way you say things when you're not really listening, when you assume the person in front of you is fundamentally safe in their own life. I made that assumption. I kept making it. And it nearly cost her everything. There's a version of me that stays up at night running that math, the months I didn't push harder, the dinners where I sat across from Garrett and felt something uneasy. I chose to call my own stubbornness. I'm not interested in punishing myself for that. It doesn't help Nora, and it doesn't change what happened. But I carry it honestly. I think that's the right way to carry it. What I know now is this. Paying attention is not the same thing as being paranoid. Trusting your unease is not the same thing as being difficult. The feeling I had about Garrett in those early years, that slight, undefinable sense that he was performing something, that feeling was information. I didn't know how to use it then. I know better now. Warren taught me something too, through all of this. He didn't hesitate when I called him. Didn't ask me if I was sure I wanted to do this, didn't hedge about getting involved. He just said he'd make some calls. 60+ years of friendship. And in the worst moment of my life, he showed up with the same quiet reliability he'd shown up with in every other moment. That kind of steadiness in a person. The kind built over decades, not performed for an occasion. That matters more than I ever thought to say out loud while I was taking it for granted. Garrett counted on the fact that no one was looking closely enough. That's how people like him operate. They find the gaps between what you assume and what you verify, and they live in those gaps. The only thing that closed the gap, in the end, was someone paying attention and refusing to stop. I'm not a man who uses the word justice easily, but Nora is 12 minutes away, and the man who tried to take her from her children is in a federal prison in Indiana. And on Saturday mornings, my kitchen smells like pancakes, and my grandson narrates Lego construction to himself on the floor. That's what I was holding on to in that hallway. That's what kept my face still. It was enough.